The invaders, a race known as the Ethel, didn't arrive with a declaration of war. They arrived with a physical law, the Glimmer-Shield. Their ships, massive floating spires of white obsidian and gold, didn't just fly, they occupied space with a divine arrogance. The Glimmer-Shield was a masterpiece of energy manipulation. It didn't push back against missiles or lasers. It absorbed their kinetic and thermal energy, recycling the very force we used against them to power their own weapons. We fired our strongest nuclear warheads at their vanguard, and the Ethel simply glowed brighter. They looked at our orbital defenses and saw nothing but a free refueling station. They began the harvest, systematic beams of light stripping the Earth's crust of its minerals, turning our cities into glass. They thought we were a species of insects to be swept aside by superior geometry. But the Ethel made a mistake. They assumed that because we couldn't break their shields with energy, we couldn't break them at all. They forgot the most primitive, brutal rule of the universe. Enough mass moving fast enough will ruin anything it touches. We created the Archimedes platform. It wasn't a ship. It was a 3-kilometer-long electromagnetic railgun anchored to the moon's orbit. And we didn't fill it with shells. We filled it with men. We are the first kinetic strike battalion. The Rail Riders. We don't have pilots. We don't have engines. We are strapped into kinetic slugs, 5-ton sharpened tungsten capsules with just enough life support for a 3-minute flight. We are launched at 1% of the speed of light. At that velocity, the Glimmer-Shield doesn't have time to absorb the energy. It shatters like glass under a hammer. We aren't a boarding party, we are a puncture wound. I am Sergeant Marcus Vane. My heart is currently being crushed against my spine by 40 gs of acceleration. And I am about to ruin the Ethel's afternoon. The loading process was a claustrophobic ritual. I climbed into this slug, a coffin of cold metal and wires. The armor I wore was a breech frame, a hydraulic skeleton designed to survive a crash that would turn a normal human into jelly. There were no windows, only a flickering sensor screen showing the target. The Ethel Prime, a flagship 5 kilometers long, hanging over the ruins of Western Europe. Pressure suit engaged. Inertial dampeners at maximum. Godspeed, Marcus, the tech's voice crackled. Load the tube, I rasped. The magnets began to hum, a low, world-shaking vibration that I felt in my teeth. The Archimedes was charging. Outside, the lunar landscape was a blur of silver and black. 3, 2, 1. Launch. The world didn't just move, it vanished. The launch was a violent deletion of reality. 1 second I was sitting in a tube, the next, the stars were long white streaks of light. The acceleration felt like a mountain had been dropped on my chest. My vision tunneled into a pinpoint of red. The sensors showed my velocity climbing. Mach 10, Mach 25, Mach 50. I was a bullet. A living, breathing piece of tungsten traveling through the vacuum of space toward a target that thought it was a god. The Ethel Prime loomed on the screen, a magnificent golden needle. I saw the Glimmer-Shield flicker, a thin blue skin of light. I didn't fire a thruster. I didn't change my course. I just braced for the impact. The collision was a soundless explosion of pure kinetic violence. The tungsten tip of my slug hit the Glimmer-Shield at 30 miles per second. The shield didn't absorb the blow, it screamed and buckled. A shockwave of azure energy rippled across the ship's hull, but the mass of the slug was too great, its speed too high. We punched through the shield like a needle through silk. Then came the hull. The Ethel obsidian skin was designed for aesthetics and radiation shielding, not for hypervelocity impacts. The slug tore through the outer plates, through 3 layers of luxury decks, and finally wedged itself deep into the ship's secondary hangar. The impact threw me against my harness. The inertial dampeners groaned and smoked, nearly failing. I tasted copper as my nose began to bleed. But I was alive. And I was inside. Breach. Breach. Breach, my suit's AI chimed. The front of the slug blew open, not with an explosion but with a pressurized release. I stepped out into a hallway made of white marble and glowing gold light. The air smelled like ozone and expensive perfume. It was too clean. It was too perfect. Then the siren started. A high melodic chime that sounded more like a song than a warning. The Ethel soldiers, the Star Guards, emerged from the light wells. They were tall, slender creatures with 4 arms and armor that looked like it was woven from liquid silver. They carried hard light spears that could slice through a tank. They moved with a dancer's grace, expecting to find a dazed, broken survivor. They found me. I raised my slugger, a heavy-duty, short-barreled shotgun that fired jagged tungsten flechettes. In the low gravity of the ship, the recoil was a beast. I fired. The first Ethel didn't just die, it was shredded. The flechettes tore through the liquid silver armor and the fragile blue flesh beneath. The creature was thrown backward 10 meters, its spear clattering across the marble floor. "Welcome to Earth," I growled, moving forward. I wasn't alone. Across the Ethel Prime, 200 other slugs had found their mark. The flagship was being punctured by 100 black needles. We were the infection. I moved toward the primary reactor core. The Ethel ship was a labyrinth of light and beauty, but to a rail rider, it was just a series of corridors to be cleared. I moved with a brutal, industrial efficiency. Shoot. Move. Go. Repeat. I reached the Grand Plaza, a massive dome overlooking the Earth. A dozen star guards were waiting, their spears glowing with lethal energy. They formed a phalanx, a wall of hard light. "End of the line, human," a voice echoed in my mind, telepathic arrogance. "I didn't come here to talk," I replied. I reached for my grav grenade, a device that temporarily increased the local gravity by 500%. I tossed it into the center of the phalanx. The effect was horrific. The Ethel, built for light gravity and graceful movements, were instantly crushed into the floor. Their silver armor crumpled under their own weight. Their bones, light and bird-like, snapped like dry twigs. While they were pinned to the marble, struggling to even breathe, I moved through them like a reaper. My heat blade, a glowing orange edge of vibrating thermal energy, carved through their necks with a single, fluid motion. The Ethel weren't warriors. They were aristocrats. They had forgotten what it was like to fight something that didn't care about their beauty or their shields. They were facing the apex predator of the galaxy. A species that had spent its entire history learning how to kill things more powerful than itself. I reached the reactor core. It was a sun trapped in a cage of gold. The energy coming off it was enough to make the hair on my arms stand up, even through the armor. Two high priests of the Ethel stood before the controls, their eyes wide with a terror they hadn't felt in 1,000 years. They raised their hands, preparing a massive telekinetic blast. I didn't wait. I fired my wrist-mounted harpoon, the tungsten spike burying itself in the central control console. I didn't want the tech. I wanted the connection. Override initiated, my suit AI signaled. I didn't hack their system. I didn't have to. I just overloaded it. I dumped the entire reserve of my armor's fusion battery directly into their delicate light network. It was like pouring a bucket of grease into a Swiss watch. The core began to scream. The gold cage turned a violent, angry red. The floor beneath my feet began to vibrate as the ship's internal geometry started to fail. Warning, reactor meltdown in T-minus 60 seconds. I turned and sprinted back toward my slug. Behind me, the Ethel flagship was falling apart. The beautiful walls were cracking, the light wells were exploding, and the star guards were fleeing in a panic. I reached the hangar just as my slug's emergency beacons began to pulse. I climbed back into the cramped metal coffin and sealed the hatch. Eject. 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 The secondary charges in the slug's base blew, launching me back out of the hole I had made. I was tumbling through the vacuum of space, the Earth a massive, swirling blue marble below me. I looked back at the Ethel Prime. The flagship didn't just explode. It disintegrated. The reactor failure triggered a chain reaction that stripped the Glimmer-Shield away, and then the internal pressure of the ship did the rest. The golden needle shattered into a million pieces of glowing debris, a rain of fire that would burn up in the atmosphere. The Ethel fleet, seeing their flagship turned into stardust by a bunch of metal capsules, began to retreat. Their shields were magnificent, their weapons were divine, but they had no answer for a species that would turn itself into a bullet just to punch them in the mouth. I drifted in the silence of orbit, my slug's thrusters gently stabilizing my tumble. My HUD showed mission complete. The Earth was still there. The fires were still burning, but the harvest had stopped. Humanity had proven the ultimate truth of the Iron Siege. You can bring the most advanced technology in the universe. You can hide behind shields of light and towers of gold. But we are the ones who know how to use the raw, brutal weight of the world against you. We don't need to be elegant. We just need to be fast. We are the rail riders. We are the kinetic answer to your energy questions. The flagship is gone. The sky is clear. The Earth is ours. The mission is over. Now someone come pick me up. I'm starting to get dizzy.